My dad built our family company from nothing, then fired me in front of everyone like I was the one bleeding it dry. The problem? I'd been quietly tracking strange late-night edits and approved payments that didn't add up. The more I asked, the higher my brother rose and the faster I fell. My name is Ethan. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my adult life I did what people like to call the responsible thing. I stayed close to home, I didn't chase risky dreams, and I built my career inside the same business that paid for my school clothes and kept the lights on in the house I grew up in. The business wasn't glamorous. We weren't some Silicon Valley story or a flashy brand with billboards. We were a regional distribution company, mid-sized, family-owned, the kind of place that works best when nobody outside the industry even notices you exist. We supplied packaging materials, safety gear, and industrial consumables to factories and warehouses across 2 states. If a plant needed pallets, shrink wrap, gloves, tape, strapping, or specialty cartons, there was a good chance it came through us. My dad founded the company in the early 90s. He started with a rented warehouse bay and one used box truck. By the time I was old enough to understand what an invoice was, we had a real building, a small fleet, and a steady customer list. My dad wore his self-made story like armor. And to be fair, he earned it. He also made sure everyone knew he earned it. Growing up, my dad wasn't the kind of man you argued with. He didn't yell constantly, and he wasn't violent, but his approval was a currency you had to work for. He praised results. He praised loyalty. He praised people who made him look good in front of others. If you disappointed him, he didn't always explode. Sometimes he got quiet, and that quiet could freeze a whole room. I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I'm telling you because it explains why at 38, I still found myself trying to prove I belonged in a company that literally had our last name on the sign. I joined full-time after college. At first I did the unglamorous work, inventory counts, loading paperwork, checking deliveries, sitting with customer service when they had a difficult account. I learned every part of the operation the way my dad demanded, by doing it, not by reading a manual. Eventually I moved into operations and then into a hybrid role that touched finance, purchasing approvals, vendor terms, margin analysis, and the internal controls that kept money from bleeding out in 1,000 tiny ways. And for years it worked. Not perfectly, but it worked. We were stable, profitable, and boring in the best way. Then, about 1.5 years ago, the ground started shifting in ways I couldn't explain at first. It began with small, nagging inconsistencies. A vendor would call about an overdue payment that I knew had been scheduled. A customer would complain we'd double-billed them. And when I checked the system, the invoice history looked messy. Not outright fraudulent, just messy. Like someone kept stepping into the process and leaving fingerprints where they didn't belong. At first I blamed growth. We'd expanded our product lines. We'd hired new staff. We'd changed software the previous year. New accounting system. New warehouse management module. Anyone who's been through that kind of transition knows the first 6 months can be chaotic. But this wasn't just software friction. It had a pattern. And patterns make my skin itch. I started noticing margin reports that didn't make sense. We'd sell the same SKU to 2 similar customers. Same quantity, same shipping zone, and the margin on one would be suspiciously thin. I'd check the pricing and see a manual override note. Sometimes the override was justified. Sometimes it wasn't explained at all. When I asked our accounting manager, she'd give me a careful answer, like she was trying not to step on a landmine. It might have been a rush order, she'd say. Could be a customer credit, she'd say. Maybe purchasing had to pay a higher spot price, she'd say. All plausible, all vague. The strangest part was that none of it triggered my dad's attention. My father was obsessed with control. He loved dashboards and weekly summaries. He would grill department heads over a 2% variance like it was a moral failure. So when these inconsistencies piled up and he didn't come storming into my office, it didn't comfort me. It worried me. Because either he didn't see it, or he did see it, and he didn't want to talk about it. Around that time, my older brother Mark started showing up more. Mark is 41, 3 years older than me, and if you met us in a neutral setting, you wouldn't assume we came from the same house. I'm steady and detail-oriented. Mark is charismatic, big laugh, big handshake, the kind of guy who can turn a complaint call into a friendly chat in 5 minutes. My dad loved that about him. For most of our 20s, Mark drifted. Sales jobs, a short-lived real estate phase, a business opportunity with a friend that quietly collapsed. My dad never said Mark failed. He'd say Mark was finding his lane. Meanwhile, I stayed in the family company and became the person who handled the lane markers. Then last year, Dad brought Mark in to strengthen relationships and expand key accounts. On paper, it made sense. Sales had been flat, competition was growing, and Mark could talk to anybody. Dad announced it like it was a strategic move, but it came with a subtle shift in power that I felt immediately. Mark didn't report to me. He didn't report to the sales manager either. He reported straight to Dad, and Dad started holding meetings without me. Not every meeting, just enough. A lunch with a vendor that I usually negotiated with. A call with a big customer where pricing exceptions would be discussed. A quick executive chat with our accounting manager that happened behind closed doors. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I tried to be an adult about it. People can get paranoid in family businesses, and paranoia turns small issues into family wars. I told myself Mark was new and needed room to operate. Still, I began documenting things. Quietly, not in a dramatic way. I just started saving emails into folders. I took notes after conversations. I exported a few reports and kept copies. If a number looked off, I'd pull the transaction history and keep it. I didn't have a grand plan. I just didn't like the idea of being responsible for a machine I couldn't fully see inside anymore. Then came the first moment that made my stomach drop. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was reviewing our monthly expense summary. One line item jumped out: consulting process optimization. It was a 5-figure payment, and it didn't match any project I knew about. I clicked into the details and saw it was paid to a small LLC with a generic name that sounded like something you'd register in 10 minutes. The approval trail showed my dad's authorization. That wasn't unusual by itself. Dad authorized large payments all the time. What was unusual was that I hadn't seen a contract, a scope of work, or even an email about it. Usually, Dad liked to brag about consultants. He liked to tell people he was bringing in experts. So I walked down the hall to his office. His door was open. He was on the phone, smiling like he was talking to a friend. I waited. When he finished, I stepped in and kept my voice neutral. "Hey, Dad. Quick question. I saw a consulting payment go out this month. Process Optimization LLC. What was that for? I don't remember a project." His expression changed in a way that was almost too fast to measure. "Why are you digging through that?" he asked. That was my first warning sign. Not an answer. A question about my question. "I'm not digging," I said. "I'm reviewing monthly expenses. It's a large payment. I just want to know what it was tied to." He leaned back, fingers interlaced, and his eyes narrowed like he was evaluating me. "Not the number. It's handled," he said. "Mark recommended someone. We're tightening some things up." I blinked. "Mark recommended a consultant." Dad's jaw flexed. "Yes, and we don't need you interrogating every decision. You're not the only one who understands this company." It wasn't the volume of his voice that hit me. It was the message: stay in your place. I walked out feeling like I'd just stepped on a pressure plate, and I knew with a kind of cold certainty that if I pushed too hard, I'd be framed as the problem. In families like ours, problem doesn't mean wrong. It means inconvenient. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere got heavier. People avoided eye contact in meetings. The accounting manager stopped volunteering details. The sales manager started copying my dad on emails that previously came to me directly. And Mark started acting like he was already the heir. He'd stroll through the warehouse slapping shoulders, calling guys buddy, saying things like, "We're going to get things back on track." He'd talk about waste and leaks like he'd discovered them personally, like he'd been the one tracking numbers for years. At first I tried to ignore it, but then Dad started repeating Mark's phrases: leakage, accountability, control. One night I stayed late and pulled a set of transaction logs from our accounting system. The system recorded changes: who edited an invoice, who issued a credit memo, who changed vendor banking details. I wasn't doing anything illegal. I had access. It was part of my job. What I saw didn't give me a clean answer. It gave me something worse: a fog of activity. Invoices edited after hours, credits issued and then reversed. Vendor details changed and changed back, notes left blank. A handful of user accounts showing a level of access they didn't need. And sprinkled through it all were approvals that led upward to my dad's user, to my dad's email, to special cases. I remember sitting there with the glow of the monitor in an empty office, feeling a slow creeping dread, because if the company was leaking money, there were only two possibilities. Either someone was stealing, or someone was covering for someone who was stealing. And in a family company, the second possibility is often more dangerous than the first. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I had proof. I didn't. Not yet. I had weirdness, and I had patterns, and I had the feeling that the story being told about losses was already being shaped without me. The next morning, Dad called a leadership meeting. Not the usual quick stand-up, a real meeting. Conference room, closed door, everyone there. My dad, Mark, the accounting manager, the sales manager, and me. Dad didn't waste time. He put printed spreadsheets on the table like he was laying out evidence in court. "We have a problem," he said. He tapped the top page, then looked straight at me. "Operations costs are up, margins are down, errors are increasing, and I'm hearing complaints from vendors and customers." He said it slowly, like he wanted each phrase to land. Then he added, "This is not the company I built." No one spoke. The air felt thin. I looked at the pages. Some of the numbers were real. Some were framed in a way that made them look worse than they were, and a few were plainly incomplete. Context missing. Time frames cherry-picked. I opened my mouth to respond carefully, but Dad cut in before I could. "I need to know," he said, "why this is happening under your watch." That sentence was the moment the problem became personal, because he wasn't asking a question. He was assigning blame. And as I sat there with everyone pretending not to watch my face, I realized something else too, something that made my throat go tight. This meeting wasn't to solve the issue. This meeting was to establish a narrative, and I could already tell from the way Mark sat back with his arms folded like a satisfied spectator that the next step in that narrative was going to come fast. I kept my voice calm because I knew the moment I sounded defensive, my dad would label it as guilt. "Dad, those numbers don't match the full period," I said, sliding the top sheet slightly. "You're looking at a 4-week window. We had 2 large returns from the Baxter account because their warehouse roof leaked. That wasn't an operational failure on our end." My father didn't even glance at the explanation like it mattered. Mark leaned forward, elbows on the table, wearing that concerned, helpful expression he always used when he wanted to look like the adult in the room. "With respect," Mark said, "customers don't care about our reasons. They care that we're reliable. And lately, we haven't been." He said "we," but his eyes flicked to me. The accounting manager, Linda, kept her gaze on her notepad like she was studying for an exam. The sales manager shifted in his chair like he wanted to disappear through the carpet. I felt heat climb up my neck, not because Mark criticized me, but because my father let him. My dad always claimed he hated public disrespect, but somehow when it was aimed at me, it became a necessary conversation. "Reliability is not the same as sabotage," I said before I could stop myself. The word sabotage landed heavy in the room. Dad's eyes sharpened. "Watch your mouth." I took a breath. "I'm saying there are irregular changes in invoicing and credits. I've seen it in the logs. If we're losing money, it's not from warehouse processes alone." Linda's pen paused. For the first time, she looked up at me. Her expression wasn't angry. It was scared. My dad didn't ask what I meant by logs. He didn't ask for details. He didn't ask who made the irregular changes. He only asked one thing. "And you didn't bring this to me earlier because—" I stared at him. "I tried. I asked about that consulting payment. You shut me down." Dad's nostrils flared. His face took on that tight, controlled look he got right before he did something that would later be described as a tough call. "You're always blaming somebody," he said. "Always implying some conspiracy. The truth is simpler, Ethan. You've gotten comfortable. You're sloppy. You've lost the edge." I wanted to argue. I wanted to list every late night, every emergency delivery, every time I fixed a mistake someone else made and took the blame anyway because I didn't want the company to look bad. But in that room it wouldn't have mattered. He wasn't weighing facts. He was weighing loyalty. And loyalty in my father's mind meant not questioning him. Mark let out a soft sigh like he was sad for me. That tiny performance made my stomach twist. Dad continued, "Starting today, I'm restructuring responsibilities. Mark will oversee key accounts and vendor relationships. Linda will report directly to me on financial controls. And you," he pointed at me, "you'll step back from approvals until we stabilize." Step back. In our world, that phrase wasn't temporary. It was exile. I forced myself to nod. "If you want to do an internal review, fine, but we should hire an independent auditor, not just move reporting lines around." My dad's lips curled into something like a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "An auditor," he said, as if I'd suggested inviting strangers to dig through our house. "We're not wasting money to prove to you that you're wrong." That's when I understood the ugly truth. My father wasn't afraid of wasted money. He was afraid of what an auditor might find. After the meeting, people scattered quickly, like the room smelled toxic. Linda avoided my eyes as she left. The sales manager gave me an apologetic look that lasted half a second. Mark lingered near the coffee station in the hallway, waiting until it was just the two of us. He smiled like we were cousins at a reunion. "Don't take it personally," he said. "Dad's under pressure." I didn't answer. Mark lowered his voice anyway, leaning closer. "Look, I know you like to be the hero, but you can't run a business on spreadsheets and suspicion. Sometimes you have to trust people." The nerve of him saying trust when he'd spent years avoiding responsibility. I looked at him. Trust doesn't mean shutting off oversight. Mark's smile tightened. "You really don't know when to stop, do you?" Then he patted my shoulder like he owned me and walked away. That afternoon I went back to my office and opened the system logs again. I didn't know what I was looking for yet. I just knew I was being cornered, and cornered people either get quiet or get smart. I exported a larger time range, 6 months, then 9, then 12. I focused on 3 categories: credit memos, vendor bank detail changes, and manual pricing overrides. Those were the areas where money could quietly slip away without triggering obvious alarms. At first it was overwhelming, thousands of lines. But as I filtered and sorted, the same patterns surfaced again. Edits late at night, edits on weekends, transactions clustered around month-end close when everyone was busy, and mistakes were easier to blame on timing. And then I noticed something I couldn't unsee. There was a user account that touched nearly every irregular entry, not always the one making the change. Sometimes it was the account that approved, sometimes the one that reversed, sometimes the one that attached a vague note like, "OK per management." The account name wasn't Mark. It wasn't even my dad's. It was AP_admin2, a generic admin login. I checked the permissions. That login had wide access, more than any single person should have. It could edit vendor profiles, issue credits, override holds, and change approval routing. That kind of access was supposed to be restricted and monitored. We'd talked about it during the software migration. I remembered it clearly because I'd argued for tighter control, and my dad had said, "We need flexibility." Flexibility. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, feeling my pulse in my throat. Admin logins were the perfect hiding place. No single name attached. No easy blame. If something went wrong, you could shrug and say multiple people used it. But I also knew something else. Even generic logins left digital fingerprints, IP addresses, workstation IDs, timestamp patterns, sometimes even the browser signature. The system recorded those details, but you had to know where to look. I was halfway through pulling a technical log report when my email pinged. It was from my dad. "Come to my office. Now." I walked down the hall, trying to slow my breathing. His door was closed. That alone was a bad sign. Inside, my dad sat behind his desk with a folder in front of him. Mark was in the chair by the window, legs crossed, watching me like I was entertainment. Dad didn't ask me to sit. He didn't offer small talk. He opened the folder and slid a printed page toward me. It was a report, an expense summary, with certain lines highlighted. I recognized the style immediately. Someone had formatted it to look official, but it wasn't a standard system report. It was curated. Dad tapped a highlighted line. "Explain this," he said. It was a freight overage charge from 3 weeks earlier. The amount wasn't huge, but the way it was presented made it look like a pattern of waste. "We had a carrier reroute because of the storm closures," I said. "We documented it. The customer approved the cost." Dad flipped the page like he didn't care. "And this? A rush order fee. Customer requested same day." Another flip. "And this? A vendor price increase. We had no alternative supplier that week." Each answer I gave was factual. Each answer I gave was also useless, because he wasn't listening. He was building momentum. Finally, he leaned forward. "Ethan," he said, "people are saying you've been making decisions that hurt us. And now I find out you've been pulling reports and digging through logs like you're some kind of investigator." I stared at him. "It's my job to monitor controls." Mark let out a small laugh like I'd just told a joke. Dad's eyes flashed to Mark, then back to me. "Your job is to support this company, not undermine it with paranoia." I felt my hands clench at my sides. "You're calling it paranoia because you don't want to look at it." Dad's voice dropped, dangerous and quiet. "I built this company. I will not have my own son implying theft in my office." I swallowed. "Then bring in an independent auditor. Prove me wrong, I'll apologize." For a moment I thought he might actually do it. I thought maybe he'd choose truth over pride. Instead, he stood up. "You're done here," he said. The words didn't register at first. My brain tried to interpret them as dramatic talk. "Dad, you're fired," he said, louder now, like he wanted the sound to fill the room and erase debate. Effective immediately. My chest tightened. "You can't just." "I can," he snapped. "And I am." Mark's smile was gone. In its place was something colder. Relief, almost. Like the last obstacle had finally been removed. Dad opened his door and called out into the hallway. "Linda," he said. I heard footsteps. Linda appeared, cautious, eyes wide. Behind her, 2 warehouse supervisors drifted closer, drawn by the tone. Dad stepped into the doorway, so anyone passing could see him and see me standing there. "I want everyone to hear this," he said, voice carrying. "Ethan has been making decisions that cost this company money. He's been creating disruption, questioning leadership, and harming our relationships. I'm removing him from the business." Every word felt like a nail. Linda's face went pale. One of the supervisors looked at me, confused, like he didn't know what he was supposed to believe. I tried to speak, but my throat wouldn't cooperate. My dad continued. "He will return his keys and access cards today. His company email will be disabled. If anyone has questions, you come to me or Mark." Then, like it was an afterthought, he added, "And if anyone else wants to go digging for imaginary thieves instead of doing their job, you'll join him." Silence, thick and humiliating. Linda's eyes flicked to mine for a split second. In that look, I saw something that made me feel worse, not better. She believed something was wrong, and she was too afraid to say it. Mark stood behind my father, arms folded now, wearing the posture of a man stepping into power. I felt my face burn, not with guilt, but with the sheer injustice of being publicly branded as the problem inside the place I'd held together for years. I forced myself to nod once, because I refused to beg. "Fine," I said quietly. Dad's mouth tightened. He didn't like that I didn't collapse. I walked back to my office. My hands moved automatically. Drawer, keychain, access badge. I opened my computer and saw that my network login had already been restricted. They'd planned this. This wasn't a decision made in the room. It was a decision made earlier, then performed in the room. As I packed, I could feel the weight of eyes outside the glass. People pretending to walk by for no reason. People whispering. People forming opinions because in a family company, the owner's version becomes reality faster than the truth ever can. When I carried the box toward the exit, Mark intercepted me near the reception area. "Ethan," he said, soft enough that only I could hear, "you did this to yourself." I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw what had been hiding behind his charm. Not confidence, hunger. "You're enjoying this," I said. Mark's expression didn't change. "I'm protecting the company." I almost laughed. "No, you're protecting your access." For a second, his mask slipped, his eyes hardened. "You should have stayed in your lane," he murmured. Then he stepped back as if we'd had a friendly goodbye. I walked out into the parking lot with my box and my pride splintering inside my ribs. The winter air hit my face, sharp and clean, and I realized something terrifying. My dad hadn't just fired me. He'd stripped me of credibility. And if I was right, if money really was being siphoned out, then I'd just been removed as the one person who might have stopped it. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. My phone buzzed twice. A text from my mom. "Your father is upset. Please don't make this worse." "No, are you okay?" "No, what happened?" "Just don't make this worse." I stared at that message until the screen dimmed. Then I drove home and tried to imagine what my life looked like without the company. The problem was, the company wasn't just my job, it was my family's story. And now, according to the version being told behind those walls, I was the villain in it. For the first week after I was fired, I moved through my own life like I was trespassing in it. I'd wake up at 5:30 out of habit, drink coffee I didn't even want, and stare at my phone like an addict waiting for a notification that would never come. No warehouse texts, no vendor escalations, no "can you approve this real quick" from accounting. Just silence. And then the second wave hit, the social silence. My dad called a few longtime employees personally. I didn't hear those calls, obviously, but I saw the results. People who used to treat me like family suddenly acted like I was radioactive. One guy I'd coached through his promotion wouldn't meet my eyes when I ran into him at the grocery store. At home, it wasn't much better. My wife, Nora, tried to be supportive, but she was also practical. And practicality has a way of sounding like doubt when you're already bleeding. "Do you have a severance?" she asked that first night. "There is no severance," I said. "It's my dad." "Do you have anything in writing?" she asked. "I have a keycard he made me hand back in front of everyone." She nodded slowly, like she was calculating how much time we had before fear became a full-time job. We weren't broke. We had savings. We had equity in our house. I wasn't helpless, but the humiliation was a different kind of debt. It sat on my chest every time I thought about my father telling people I'd cost the company money, like I was some reckless teenager who'd totaled the family car. And the worst part was what my mom did. She didn't call me to ask what happened. She didn't ask if I needed anything. She didn't say your father went too far. She invited us to Sunday dinner like nothing had happened. When we showed up, my dad greeted Nora politely, kissed her cheek, and treated me like I was a neighbor he barely knew. Mark was there, of course, sitting at the table like a prince who'd just claimed his throne. He raised his glass at one point and said, "To family sticking together in tough times." My dad smiled at that. I chewed my food and tasted nothing. That night, on the drive home, Nora said quietly, "They're trying to rewrite you." That sentence hit me harder than my dad firing me did, because it was true. They weren't just pushing me out of the business. They were pushing me out of the story of the business. And stories are how families decide who gets forgiven. Over the next month, I did what I always do when I feel powerless. I organized. I updated my resume. I reached out to a few contacts in logistics and operations. I started looking at consulting roles, process improvement, supply chain, internal controls. The irony wasn't lost on me. I also did something else, quietly, without telling my father or my brother. I hired an attorney. Not to sue immediately, not to start a war, but to protect myself. The attorney was a calm woman named Diane who specialized in employment law and business disputes. I told her everything. The meeting, the firing, the public humiliation, the accusations, and the fact that I'd raised concerns about financial irregularities. She listened without interrupting, then asked one question that made my stomach tighten. "Do you have any documents that show you flagged these issues before you were terminated?" I hesitated. "I have some exported reports on my personal drive. Nothing stolen. Things I had access to." Diane nodded. "Keep them. Don't share them. Don't email them around, but keep them. And write down everything you remember with dates, right now." So I did. I created a timeline like I was building a case file. The consulting payment, the leadership meeting, the restructuring, the folder my dad showed me, the way my access was cut off so quickly it had to be planned. And then Diane did something that felt both boring and powerful. She sent a formal preservation letter. It wasn't a lawsuit, it was a notice. It told the company to preserve relevant records, emails, accounting logs, approval trails, because a dispute might arise. I remember holding the copy in my hands and thinking, if my dad sees this, he's going to explode. But Diane didn't send it to my dad directly. She sent it to the company's registered address and legal contact on file. That meant it would likely land on Linda's desk or whoever was acting as internal admin. A week later, I got my first sign that it had landed exactly where it needed to. Linda called me, not on my cell, on a blocked number. "Ethan," she said, voice tight. My throat went dry. "Linda, are you okay?" There was a pause, like she was listening for someone nearby. "I shouldn't be calling," she whispered. "But I saw the letter. Are they preserving records?" I asked. Another pause. "They're talking about it." That was not the answer I wanted. "Linda," I said, keeping my voice low, "what's happening in there?" She exhaled shakily. "Things are getting strange. Mark keeps asking for reports he doesn't understand. Your dad is angry all the time, and there are transactions I can't reconcile." My pulse hammered. "What kind of transactions?" "I can't," she started, then stopped. "Just be careful. I don't want you blamed for something worse." The call ended abruptly. I sat in my kitchen staring at the wall, feeling the same dread I'd felt in my office the night I found that admin login. Because Linda didn't sound like someone worried about profit margins. She sounded like someone worried about a crime. In the following weeks, the company started showing cracks from the outside. A vendor I'd known for years, a tough, no-nonsense woman named Priya, texted me. "Hey Ethan, quick question. Are you still at the company? We got a weird request to change payment routing." My stomach dropped. I replied carefully, "No, I'm not there anymore." "What request?" She didn't give details in text. She called me instead. "They emailed from your company's domain," she said, "requesting we update the ACH info on file. It came from an admin address, not a person. That's not normal for you guys. I swallowed. Did you change it? No, Priya said. I told them we only do that with a signed form and a verification call. Whoever it was got annoyed. Annoyed. That detail mattered. Scammers get annoyed when you slow them down. Honest people get cooperative. Priya, I said, if they try again, forward it to me. Don't copy anyone at the company. Just send it. She hesitated. Ethan, are you saying? I'm saying be cautious, I cut in, not wanting her to say it out loud. Please. After that, I couldn't pretend I was moving on. I tried. I really did. I went on interviews. I smiled and talked about process improvement like my life hadn't just been detonated. But behind the scenes, I started building something I never thought I'd need against my own family. A quiet archive. I reached out to people I trusted, not to gossip but to listen. I asked vague questions. I let them talk, and over time a picture started forming. Mark was acting like a king, but he was also frantic. He was pushing discounts to win accounts at any cost. He was pressuring warehouse staff to ship faster while cutting corners on documentation. He was approving vendor payments quickly, sometimes without proper backup. And my father was trying to keep up with him. Dad had always been the control freak. Now he was letting Mark make moves that didn't fit the old rules. When someone questioned it, Dad snapped and reminded them who owned the building. One afternoon, about 2 months after I was fired, I got another call, this time from the bank. Not my personal bank, the bank that held the company's line of credit. The caller was a relationship manager named Calvin, someone I'd sat across from in meetings for years. Ethan, he said warmly, I heard you're no longer with the company. That's correct, I said, already tense. Calvin hesitated. I'm calling because we're preparing for the annual credit review. There are some reporting items we're missing. I said nothing, letting him continue. We also need to confirm who is responsible for financial oversight now, he added. I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. That used to be me. Yes, Calvin said carefully. That's why I'm calling. The documents we received aren't consistent with prior years. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? I can't go into detail, he said, but the bank will likely require an independent review this cycle. Not unusual, just standard when there's a change in management and reporting anomalies. Independent review. Those 2 words lit up in my head like a flare. After I got off the phone, I sat down and opened my timeline again. Then I added a new line. Bank likely triggers independent audit. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sick because I knew what it meant. If the bank saw anomalies from the outside, then the money leak wasn't small anymore. And if the money leak wasn't small, someone inside the company was either stealing aggressively or covering up losses with increasingly desperate moves. Another month passed. I took a contract role with a mid-sized manufacturing firm, temporary operations consultant. It kept me busy, kept cash coming in, kept Nora from watching me spiral. But every few days, I'd get another small sign that things inside my father's company were getting worse. A delivery driver I knew told me payments were delayed and fuel cards were acting weird. A former coworker messaged me late at night. Mark is changing things fast. It feels like panic. Then, right when I started thinking maybe I should stop caring, maybe I should let the business burn if my dad insisted on feeding it gasoline, I got an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line was simple. You were right. No signature. No explanation. Just those 3 words. My stomach tightened as I opened it. Inside was a forwarded chain of internal emails, partial screenshots, not full headers, showing a tense back and forth between Linda and my dad about missing documentation for certain vendor payments. Linda was asking for backup. My dad was telling her to process it because Mark confirmed. Then there was a final message from Mark, short and sharp. Stop slowing this down. We don't have time for your paranoia. My hands went cold. I stared at the email chain for a long time, then checked the attachments again. There was also a single image, grainy, taken from someone's phone, of a computer screen showing an accounting log entry. User AP_admin2. Action vendor bank details changed. Timestamp Saturday 11:47 p.m. No workstation ID visible. No IP address. Just enough to confirm what I'd suspected. The sender hadn't included their name, but I had a guess. Linda wouldn't risk sending that. She was too scared. This felt like someone who'd already decided they were leaving. Someone angry enough to burn a bridge. I replied with 2 words. Who is this? No response came. For the next week, I checked my inbox constantly, like I was waiting for a second shoe to drop. And it did. Just not how I expected. Diane called me. I got a call, she said, voice measured, From who? I asked. The company's outside counsel, she said. They want to talk. They asked if you'd be willing to meet regarding ongoing financial review procedures. My heart hammered. They're doing an audit. Not officially, Diane said. But something is happening. And Ethan, listen to me. Do not go in alone. Do not speak off the record. And do not let them turn this into you confessing to things you didn't do. I stared out my kitchen window at the winter gray sky. Why would they call me? Diane paused. Because when people start digging and the numbers don't add up, they look for the person who used to keep the numbers clean. That night, Nora watched me pace the living room and finally said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "If I go in, they'll try to trap me. If I don't go in, they'll say I refuse to cooperate." Nora's eyes narrowed. "And what if this isn't about you cooperating? What if they're scared of what you know?" That thought lodged into me like a hook. Because the truth was, I didn't know enough. Not yet. I had patterns, suspicions, fragments, but I didn't have the one thing that could flip the entire story back onto the people who deserved it. Proof. 2 days later, Diane and I sat in a bland conference room across from a suited attorney I'd never met, and a man introduced as an independent financial consultant. Not an auditor yet. Not officially. The consultant asked polite questions about our controls, our approval workflow, who had access to admin logins, and what I'd observed before being terminated. I answered carefully, sticking to facts. Then he asked something that made the room tilt. "Did the company ever use shared admin accounts for accounts payable functions?" he said. Diane glanced at me. I kept my expression neutral. "Yes," I said. "I argued against it during implementation. I was overruled." The consultant nodded slowly and wrote something down. And then he asked the next question, one that told me they weren't just sniffing around anymore. "Do you know where we can obtain the complete accounting system log exports?" he said, including workstation IDs and email approval chains. I held his gaze, feeling my pulse in my ears because I understood what he was really saying. They were about to pull a thread, and whoever had been hiding behind that admin login was about to be dragged into the light, whether my father was ready for it or not. I didn't answer the consultant right away, not because I wanted to be difficult, but because I could feel the trapdoors under the carpet. If I named the wrong person, they'd say I was retaliating. If I gave them a method that violated policy, they'd say I stole data. If I stayed silent, they'd say I was hiding something. So I did what I'd learned to do around my father. I stayed calm and made it procedural. The complete exports would be generated by an admin-level user in the accounting system, I said. Historically, that was me and Linda. The IT vendor also has access depending on the support contract, but the cleanest way is to have Linda generate it in writing as part of an independent review request. The consultant nodded as if he'd expected that. The outside counsel wrote something down. Diane squeezed my wrist under the table, subtle, supportive, and also a reminder to keep my mouth shut beyond what I had to say. The outside counsel cleared his throat. "We'll coordinate with the company," he said. "Mr. Grant, Ethan, thank you for your time." The meeting ended with fake politeness, the kind that only exists when people are measuring legal risk with every syllable. When Diane and I got into the hallway, she stopped walking and looked straight at me. "They're already looking at the logs," she said. "They just don't have what they need yet." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," she said, "either the company is cooperating or someone inside is obstructing." 2 days later, I got a call from Linda, this time not blocked. Her voice was tight but steadier than before. "They're asking for exports," she said. My heart kicked. "The full audit logs?" "Yes," she whispered, "and email approvals. They want to map approvals to payments and match them to the system change history. They're calling it process verification, but, Ethan, it's a forensic review." Forensic. That word made my stomach drop and lift at the same time. "Are you giving it to them?" I asked. Linda paused. "I'm trying. But your dad, he's controlling it. He wants Mark involved." "Mark should not be involved," I said immediately. "I know," Linda said, and I heard her swallow. "But your dad keeps saying it's his company, and no one's going to invite strangers to interrogate his family." That sentence sounded exactly like my father. I leaned against my kitchen counter, feeling a familiar anger rise. "Linda, listen to me. If you let Mark touch those exports, anything that's clean could suddenly become unclear." Linda's voice dropped. "He already asked me to summarize things instead of sending the raw files. That was it. That was obstruction dressed up as efficiency." "Linda," I said carefully, "I'm not telling you what to do. But if there's nothing wrong, raw files protect everyone. Summaries protect only the person who controls the summary. I expected her to hang up. Instead, she said something I'll never forget. "I don't think your dad understands what Mark is," she whispered. My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "I think," she said, voice trembling now, "your dad thinks Mark is helping him, but Mark is using him." The line went silent for a second. Then she added, "They're holding a meeting tomorrow. The consultant is coming to the office. Your dad demanded you not be invited." I let out a slow breath. "Of course he did." Linda hesitated. "Ethan, do you have copies of anything from before you left? Anything that shows admin usage patterns?" I could have lied. I could have told her I had nothing, and maybe that would have been safer. But safe had gotten me fired. "I have exports of selected logs," I said. "Not complete, but enough to show the pattern. I've kept them secured." Linda exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Because I did something too." My skin went cold. "Linda, what did you do?" "I printed a few things," she said quickly, like ripping off a bandage. "Before your access was terminated, I watched what happened. I saw the way your dad disabled you, and I knew someone would try to pin it on you. So I printed some change histories, and I saved email threads." My pulse hammered. "Where are they?" "At home," she whispered. "In a folder." I didn't know who to trust. I closed my eyes. The pieces were moving. Quietly, dangerously, but moving. "Linda," I said, "don't bring them to the office, don't email them. If you want, Diane can arrange a secure handoff." Linda's voice cracked. "I'm scared, Ethan." "I know," I said, "but you're not wrong to be scared." That night I barely slept. I kept replaying the word forensic in my head, imagining what it would look like when someone finally treated the company's systems like a crime scene instead of a family argument. The next morning, Diane called me before I'd even finished my coffee. "They called again," she said. "Outside counsel?" I asked. "Yes," Diane said. "They want you to sign a confidentiality agreement and provide a statement about admin access practices and who had what authority." I felt my jaw clench. "So now they want my help." "They want control," Diane corrected. "They want your cooperation on paper so they can shape the narrative. We'll cooperate, but only under conditions that protect you." We drafted a short written statement. Pure facts. No accusations. No emotional language. Then Diane did something that made me both nervous and relieved. She requested that any interview with me include the independent consultant present, and that we receive copies of any materials referenced in the interview. Outside counsel didn't like that, but they agreed. The interview happened over video call. This time the consultant asked sharper questions. "Who created the AP_admin2 account?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "It existed when we went live. It may have been created during implementation." "Who used it?" he asked. "It was intended for emergency processing when named users were locked out," I said. "But it became a convenience shortcut." "Convenience for whom?" he asked. I kept my voice level. "For anyone who didn't want their name on a change." The consultant's eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary. Then he looked down at his notes, like he'd just checked a box he'd been waiting to check. After the call ended, Diane sat back and exhaled. "They're going to find it," she said. "What?" I asked, though I already knew. "The link," she said. "The workstation IDs, the IP addresses, the email approvals. Shared admin logins don't hide the machine. People forget that." 3 days passed with no news. The silence was worse than the insults, because silence meant digging. Then my dad called me. Not text, not email, a direct call. I stared at his name on the screen until it nearly went to voicemail. Nora watched me from the kitchen table, her face tense. I answered. "Hello?" My dad's voice was clipped. "We need to talk." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because of the audacity of him acting like we were having a normal disagreement. "I have an attorney," I said. "I know," he snapped. "And now you're going to hide behind paperwork like a coward?" Nora's eyes flashed. I held up a hand to signal I had it. "I'm not hiding," I said. "I'm protecting myself. You fired me and accused me publicly." He went quiet for a beat. Then he said, "They're asking questions." I didn't answer. "They're digging through emails," he continued, voice strained now. "Bank wants more documentation, vendor complaints, payments. It's a mess. You made it a mess when you let Mark run things without controls," I said. Dad's voice rose. "Don't you dare blame your brother." "Then who should I blame?" I cut in, my calm starting to crack. "Because it wasn't me. I wasn't even in the building." There was a sound on the line, breathing, maybe his hand covering the receiver. Then he said, "Lower now. You were always jealous of him." That sentence stabbed in a place I didn't expect, because it wasn't just wrong, it was lazy. It was the explanation he'd used my whole life to avoid admitting. Mark got special treatment. "I'm not jealous," I said. "I'm exhausted." Dad didn't respond to that. Instead, he said, "Come to the office tomorrow." My stomach tightened. "Why?" "A meeting," he said, "with the consultant. We're going to clear this up." "Am I invited?" I asked, "or am I being summoned?" He ignored the question. "Be there at 9. Then he hung up. For a moment I just stood there, phone in my hand, like I'd been punched and couldn't find the bruise yet. Nora spoke first. "Don't go alone." "I won't," I said, already reaching for Diane's number. Diane's reaction was immediate. "He's panicking," she said. "Either they found something, or they're close. We'll attend, but only if I'm present, and we will record notes." The next day, as I drove toward the office, I felt something I hadn't felt since the moment I was fired. Not hope, momentum. The building looked the same from the outside. Our logo, the same worn asphalt, the same flag out front. But when I walked in, the atmosphere was different. People were quieter, not busy quiet, nervous quiet. The receptionist avoided my eyes. A warehouse supervisor glanced at me like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Mark's laugh echoed faintly from down the hall, too loud for the tension in the air. It sounded forced. Diane and I were escorted into the conference room. My dad was already there, standing at the window with his arms crossed. Mark sat at the table, tapping his phone. Linda sat near the end, shoulders tight, eyes down. The independent consultant was there too, laptop open, expression unreadable. When I entered, my dad turned, and I saw it on his face. He looked older, not from time, from fear. Mark stood up like he was going to greet me, then changed his mind halfway through and just nodded. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's get this over with," he said. The consultant cleared his throat. "Thank you all for attending," he said professionally. "As part of the bank's requirement for continued credit facilities, and due to inconsistencies discovered during preliminary review, we've conducted a targeted assessment of accounts payable controls, vendor profile changes, and approval communications." The words were formal, but the meaning was simple. The bank smelled blood. My father stiffened at inconsistencies discovered. Mark's jaw tightened. The consultant clicked his laptop. A screen at the front of the room lit up with a simple chart. Dates on one axis, categories on the other. "I want to start with vendor bank detail changes," he said. Mark leaned back, trying to look bored. My dad kept his eyes on the screen like it was a judge. "In the last 8 months, the consultant continued, there were 27 instances of vendor payment routing modifications that did not follow documented verification procedures." Linda flinched slightly. My father shot her a look like she'd betrayed him. Linda's eyes stayed down. The consultant raised a hand. "To be clear, we are not assigning blame at this point. We are presenting data." He clicked again. A list appeared. Timestamps, vendor names blurred, internal user accounts. And there it was, again and again. AP_admin2. The consultant pointed. Many of these changes were executed under a shared admin login. However, our system-level review includes workstation identifiers and network origin points. I felt my pulse spike. This was the thread. This was the moment where the fog either cleared or swallowed us all. My dad's voice came out rough. "What are you saying?" The consultant looked at him evenly. "I'm saying the shared login did not hide the source device." Mark's tapping stopped. The consultant clicked once more, and on the screen appeared a set of technical details, workstation names, IP addresses, and a repeated identifier that made Mark's face lose color so fast it was almost surreal. Because the workstation name wasn't generic, it was personal. It matched the naming convention Mark had bragged about when he got his new laptop. And beneath that, tied to multiple late-night entries, was the same home network origin. The consultant didn't say Mark's name yet. He didn't have to. But he did say the next sentence like a knife sliding out of a sheath. "These transactions originate overwhelmingly from a single user environment associated with Mr. Mark Grant's assigned device and network." The room went so silent I could hear the HVAC hum. My dad turned slowly, like his body didn't want to obey his brain. "Mark," he said. Mark's mouth opened, then closed. He swallowed. This is ridiculous," he said, voice too loud. "Anyone could have used my laptop. It was in the office all the time." The consultant didn't react emotionally. He just clicked again. "Which brings us to email approvals," he said. On the screen, a timeline of messages appeared. Subject lines, timestamps, senders, recipients. Not full content yet. Just enough to show a chain. We identified multiple instances where vendor banking changes were followed by payment approvals, the consultant continued. And those approvals were authorized through email directives. The directives originate from Mr. Mark Grant's email account, and in several instances they reference the shared login explicitly. My throat tightened. I looked at Linda. Her eyes were glossy, but she didn't look surprised. She looked relieved, like someone finally said the thing she'd been carrying alone. My dad's hands clenched at his sides. "Mark," he said again, weaker this time, like he was begging for a different answer. Mark's eyes darted to me, and in that glance I saw pure calculation. Not fear of being caught, fear of losing control. "This is a setup," Mark snapped. "Ethan's been collecting stuff for months. He's been poisoning everyone against me." I didn't even respond. I didn't need to. The screen was doing the talking now. Diane leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "Don't say a word. Let the data speak." The consultant paused, then said, "There is more. But due to the seriousness of what we've identified, we will be issuing a formal written report. The bank will receive it. The company's legal counsel will receive it. And," he looked at my father, "the company will need to respond." My dad's face tightened like he was trying to hold his pride together with sheer will. Mark stood abruptly, chair scraping. "This is insane," he said. "I'm not sitting here while you accuse me." The consultant held up a hand. "Mr. Grant, please." Mark cut him off. "No, Ethan wanted this. He wanted to destroy me. Congratulations." Then Mark turned toward the door, and as he passed behind my chair, he leaned down just enough for me to hear him. "You think you've won," he hissed. "You have no idea what you just started." And then he walked out. The door shut hard behind him. My dad didn't follow. He just stood there, staring at the empty doorway, like his mind was trying to rewind the last 10 minutes and find a different ending. The consultant closed his laptop slightly, like he was giving the room a second to breathe. "We will reconvene tomorrow," he said. "At that time, we will present the supporting documentation in full, including the detailed email chain and the accounting log correlation." Tomorrow. That single word hung in the air like a countdown, because tomorrow wasn't just a meeting. Tomorrow was the day the story my father had told everyone about me, about who was costing the company money, was either going to collapse, or he was going to find a way to bury the truth to save his golden son. That night, after the meeting, my dad didn't speak to me in the hallway. He didn't look at me either. He walked out of the conference room like a man leaving a funeral, shoulders rigid, jaw clenched, moving on pure instinct. Linda approached me while Diane was gathering her things. Her hands were shaking. "Ethan," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do with that. I'd wanted apologies for months, but in that moment it felt too small compared to what was unfolding." "I don't need sorry," I said quietly. "I need the truth to stay intact." Linda nodded, eyes wet. "I brought the folder," she said. My chest tightened. "You brought it here?" "No," she said quickly. "It's in my car. I didn't want it in the building overnight." Diane stepped closer. "Linda, we need to handle that carefully," she said. "But yes, we can secure it." My dad heard none of this, or maybe he heard it and pretended not to. He left the building without saying a word to anyone, as if silence could hold the walls up. On the drive home, Nora asked me, "Do you think he'll believe it now?" I kept my eyes on the road. "I think he'll believe it when he can't unsee it." And that's the part I didn't say out loud. Belief wasn't the real issue anymore. The data wasn't asking for belief. It was asking for consequences. The next morning I showed up with Diane again. So did my dad, but he looked like he hadn't slept. Mark was there too, though he arrived late, swaggering in with sunglasses on like he was making a point. He wasn't making a point. He was trying to pretend he wasn't afraid. The consultant started the session without drama. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse anyone with emotion. He simply laid out what he'd found. First, he presented the audit trail in the most literal sense, the accounting log exports with timestamps, user accounts, and workstation IDs. He walked us through how shared admin logins worked, how the system still captured the originating device, and how patterns over time formed a fingerprint no one could fake without planning. Then he displayed a spreadsheet of payment routing changes tied to vendor profiles. One row stood out, highlighted, a vendor profile that had been edited late on a Saturday night. A bank account changed, a payment issued Monday morning, and the receiving bank account wasn't the vendor's established account. It belonged to an LLC created less than a year earlier. A shell. Mark scoffed loudly. Lots of vendors use LLCs, he said. The consultant didn't even blink. They do, he agreed. However, the receiving account in this case is not associated with the vendor's EIN, and the verification call did not occur. Additionally, the email instruction to process the change came from Mr. Mark Grant's account. He clicked the screen, and there it was, an email chain, not a single message. A chain. Multiple messages across weeks, escalating. Mark telling Linda to push it through. Mark referencing the admin login like it was a tool he owned. Use AP_admin2 if the system blocks you. Mark writing, Dad already approved it. And then when Linda asked for written confirmation, Mark replying, stop acting like a cop, do it. And the worst part, because it implicated my father without directly accusing him, was the way my dad responded in the chain. Because my father was in it. Not in every email, but enough. Enough to show he was copied. Enough to show he saw the concerns. Enough to show he replied twice, with short directives that could be interpreted as approval. Handle it. Do not delay. Mark is fixing what you can't. I watched my dad's face as those messages appeared on the screen. His eyes didn't blink. His mouth stayed tight, but his skin went gray, like the blood had drained away. The consultant spoke again. This is not an accounting error, he said calmly. This is a control failure with indicators of intentional misdirection. Mark slammed his hand on the table. You're all eating this up, he snapped, pointing at me. This is exactly what he wanted. He wanted to come back as the hero. I turned to him for the first time that day, and spoke slowly, forcing each word to stay steady. I wanted to work, I said. I wanted the company to be clean. I wanted Dad to treat oversight like oversight instead of betrayal. Mark's face twisted. You think you're better than me? I didn't raise my voice. No. I think you thought you could hide behind our last name. The room went quiet again, and in that quiet my dad finally spoke. Mark, he said, voice hoarse, tell me you didn't do this. It sounded like a father pleading with a son, but it also sounded like a man realizing he'd gambled everything. His business, his legacy, his family on the wrong person. Mark looked at him, and I saw something I'd never seen in him before. Contempt. Not panic, not shame. Contempt. He laughed once, short and sharp. You're asking me now, he said. After you handed me the keys? After you kicked Ethan out because he made you feel stupid? My dad flinched as if Mark had slapped him. Mark leaned forward, voice dripping with bitterness. I did what I had to do. You wanted results. You wanted cash flow. You wanted to keep pretending we were the same company from 1996 while everyone else modernized. So yeah, money moved. You think you're some saint. You think you didn't benefit from me making it work. Linda's hands flew to her mouth. She looked like she might be sick. My father's eyes widened. You stole from me, he said, barely audible. Mark scoffed. I took what I was owed. That was the moment the family story shattered. Because it wasn't just about missing money anymore. It was about who Mark believed he was in our family. Entitled, untouchable, and above consequences. The consultant closed his laptop. At this point, he said, I need to be very clear. This moves beyond internal process review. You should consult legal counsel immediately. The bank will require remediation. There may be regulatory reporting obligations depending on the amounts and the nature of the transactions. Mark stood up abruptly, but this time he didn't swagger. He looked around the room like he was searching for an ally and finding none. He grabbed his phone, muttered something under his breath, and walked out. No threats this time. No whisper in my ear. Just retreat. After he left, my dad sank into a chair. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Diane said quietly, we should end this meeting and discuss next steps with counsel present. The consultant agreed and began packing up. Linda stayed frozen in her seat, staring at the table like it might give her instructions. My dad finally looked at me, not at Diane, not at the consultant, at me. Ethan, he said, voice cracked in a way I wasn't used to hearing from him. I thought you were trying to embarrass me. I held his gaze. I was trying to stop you from being embarrassed by reality. He swallowed hard, and I could see him fighting the reflex to turn it into anger. He'd lived his whole life with anger as a shield. What did he take? My dad asked. The consultant had left the room, but Diane knew the numbers from the briefing. We won't guess, she said. We'll wait for the final report. But there are indicators of significant misappropriation. My dad's eyes closed for a second. When he opened them again, they were red. And in that moment, I felt something I didn't expect to feel. Not satisfaction. Grief. Because the justice I'd wanted wasn't clean. It wasn't a triumphant movie scene. It was watching my father realize he'd protected the wrong son so fiercely that he'd burned the right one. Over the next few weeks, everything moved fast. The bank froze certain facilities until controls were corrected. An outside audit firm was brought in. Real auditors this time, not consultants. Vendor payments were put under dual approval. Shared admin accounts were disabled. It rebuilt access permissions and implemented multi-factor authentication, the kind of thing I'd asked for and been dismissed over. Mark tried to negotiate. He sent my dad long texts about misunderstandings and pressure. He tried to paint it like a temporary cash flow maneuver. When that didn't work, he tried guilt. "You're choosing Ethan over me." My dad didn't respond. Or maybe he did, privately. I don't know. But Mark stopped showing up. Eventually, through attorneys, we learned the theft wasn't one dramatic transfer. It was a slow bleed, rerouting vendor payments, creating fake consulting invoices, issuing credits and diverting refunds, and masking it all with late-night admin changes. Not every dollar went into Mark's pocket directly. Some went to cover other holes he'd created. Some went into accounts connected to the Shell LLC. The intent was the same. He'd been using the company like an ATM, and he'd been using my father's pride as the pin. My dad asked me to come in one evening after hours. Not a meeting with a crowd. Just the two of us in the office he'd built, surrounded by plaques and framed photos and the old black and white picture of his first truck. I stood in the doorway, arms at my sides, feeling cautious. He gestured to the chair across from him. "I don't deserve you coming back," he said, before I even sat. I didn't answer. I needed him to keep going. He took a breath. "I fired you because it was easier than admitting you might be right," he said, "and because I couldn't stand the idea that I'd been fooled." I sat down slowly. "You weren't fooled," I said. "You were willfully blind." He nodded once, like that word hit its target. Then he said, "I told people you were the reason we were losing money." My throat tightened. "Yes, you did." My dad's shoulders sagged. "I need to fix that." I stared at him. "How?" He swallowed. "I'm going to address it. Staff meeting. Publicly. The same way I did it to you." A part of me wanted to say no. Not because it wouldn't help, but because I didn't want my life to revolve around getting my father to do the decent thing. But another part of me, the part that remembered walking out with a box in my arms while people watched, needed the record corrected. "Okay," I said. "Do it." He nodded again. "And if you want," he added, voice quiet, "you can come back. Not as a favor, as a partner, with real authority, real controls." I looked at him for a long moment. "I'll consider it," I said. "But I'm not coming back to earn your approval. I'm coming back only if the company is run like a business, not like a kingdom." My dad's eyes glistened. "Fair." The staff meeting happened the next week. My dad stood in front of the same people he'd used as an audience when he destroyed me. He didn't make it poetic. He didn't over-explain. He said the truth in plain language. He had removed me unfairly. He had blamed me wrongly. An independent review found misconduct that did not involve me. He apologized, and he was taking steps to repair the damage. Some people looked shocked. Some looked relieved. A few looked ashamed. Afterward, one warehouse supervisor came up to me and said quietly, "I knew you weren't the problem. I just couldn't say it." I nodded because I understood. Fear makes people small. It makes them quiet. It makes them complicit without ever meaning to be. In the end, the biggest shift in power wasn't that Mark got exposed. It was that my father's version of reality stopped being the only version that mattered. And that changed everything. I did return to the company eventually, but not like before. Not as the son trying to prove himself. I returned with boundaries, written authority, and systems that didn't rely on anyone's mood. Mark is no longer part of our lives in any meaningful way. There were legal consequences, financial restitution efforts, and a long, ugly process of cleaning up the mess. I'm not going to pretend it was satisfying in a simple way. It wasn't. What it was clarifying. Because I learned something I wish I'd learned earlier. When someone accuses you loudly in public, it's often because they need everyone focused on you so no one looks at them. And in a family, the most dangerous thief isn't always the one who takes money. Sometimes it's the one who steals the truth by deciding who gets believed and who gets sacrificed. I was sacrificed once. I won't be again.